on YouTube, and I am going to start recording through the cloud, and you may take it away, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you very much, Sean. It looks like we have quorum, so we can get this meeting started. Can we do a roll call, please?
Chairman Figueroa,
Here.
Vice Chairman Rankin,
Here.
Ms. Chevrolet,
She's connecting with audio, so let's come back to her. Oh, you can call her name one more time?
Ms. Chevrolet,
Ms. Civillet, are you present? Ms. Civillet, can you hear us?
I don't think she
Let's
can
come
hear
back
us.
to her. Let's come back to her because I see her.
Mr. Cohen, Mr. Cohen,
Mr. Cohen, can you hear us? Well, let's come back to you. Mark him absent for now.
Mr. Cohen absent. Mrs. Dorita,
Here.
Ms. D,
Here.
Mr. Fontaine, absent. Mrs. Swearingen,
Here.
Mrs. Ray,
Here.
Go back to Mr. Cohen. Are you able to announce yourself? We're not getting audio from you, and you don't appear to be muted. I don't know if you stepped away. Oh, but I don't have audio on you, actually. I don't see that you're connected with audio.
It looks like he's trying. Looks like he's trying now.
Mr. Cohen, are you present?
Ken, you're on mute.
I just texted him.
Ms. Civillet, are you present? Can you please unmute yourself?
I'm here.
Hello? Yes, I'm here.
we have 8 present and 2 absent.
I'm present.
Kathy Mark present, Ms. Civillet, thank you.
Thank you, Sean.
Present.
Can we put the agenda up on the screen, please? All right, so while Sean is putting the agenda up, we've run into an unfortunate circumstance for tonight's meeting. It appears that City Council will be using this exact Zoom for a meeting at 5:30, which unfortunately cuts our meeting to just 5:30. And I know we've got some really important things to talk about. So what we're going to try to do is have the rest of the meeting Wednesday next week. Hopefully that works with people's schedules. But we at least had 30 minutes tonight and didn't want to pass up on that opportunity to have us all together to speak about, certainly what's on the agenda, or what we can fit that's on the agenda, and also to have some public comment as well. So obviously we know what we should all know what's happened here in Providence over the weekend with Mr. Jamal Gunkar, his unfortunate situation. He's currently hospitalized, and on behalf of the para board, we send our well wishes to this young man, to his family as well, hoping that he can pull out and make a full recovery. So again, an unfortunate event, and as a para board, we would like to have an active participation in looking into that matter, to be able to examine as the independent body that we are. Currently, our executive director will provide an update, but we've had some preliminary discussion, but we're not necessarily included in the overall structure that was laid out today in the press conference in terms of having an independent body look at this particular instance. So I want to be brief because I want to get into the agenda. We can tonight, because we don't have a lot of time, we can go into our second item. But what I'd also like is to have an opportunity to give the community some time to speak, and would greatly appreciate a motion to allow for public comment, because I don't believe that it's open it's included in here. So a motion to amend the agenda to include at least 10 minutes of public comment before we can get into the next item on our agenda. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? All in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed? Abstain? Okay, motion carries. Sean, do we have any individuals that have their hands up in the weight room? And again, we want to try to keep these comments to about 10 minutes, given that we do want to officially try to have a discussion on this particular matter, as it is the second item on our agenda.
Right now, we do not have anyone with their hands raised that is an attendee. However, if someone would like to speak, as the chairman has asked, you may raise your hand with your Zoom options by clicking the participants button and clicking raise hand in the lower right-hand corner of that panel. And if you're on with the telephone, it probably will give you the prompts to what to type on your keypad in order to on your phone in order to raise your hand with your phone. So now, Chairman, we have 3 people who've raised their hands, which you may be able to see.
All right, thank you. Can we call on the first individual?
Yes, the first person is Lisa Scorpio. I'm going to allow her to talk, assuming those are the pronouns that she uses.
Hi, good afternoon. Can you hear me? Hello?
Very low volume, if you can.
Very low volume, yeah.
Hello, can you hear me now? Wait a minute.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I just have a quick question. What do you mean the city council is using this Zoom? Did you hear me?
Yeah, no, did hear the question.
I never heard of anything like that in my life.
Yep, did hear the question. This is a message that we received from staff.
So although they can have their own Zoom, they're gonna take over your Zoom, so you have to cut this short. Am I getting that correctly?
Sean, would you?
Sorry, yes, I'll respond to this.
Yeah.
This is actually a fault of the city clerk's office, so I'll take responsibility for this. We unfortunately, we're all learning how to use technology in a lot of new ways, and we had 2 Zoom meetings that were scheduled on the same ID, and because we are a public meeting and the credentials have already been sent out, it would not be legal for us to switch to a different ID at this late juncture. So I sincerely apologize. Yes, if you want to put it that way, we did allow the city. The later meeting is going to cut off the earlier meeting. That's how it works, and unfortunately, the later meeting does happen to be a city council committee meeting. So I'd rather, if we could, I'm sorry for that. I don't want to take any more time because we only have 21 minutes left that this meeting
That's
can go.
fine, that's fine. You've explained it to me. The other meeting should have been canceled. Everything that happened last night, this is absolutely unacceptable. Thank you for speaking with me.
Thank you, Lisa. Next person. You're on mute, Sean.
The next person is Carlos Romero. He's now unmuted.
Hi.
Go ahead, Carlos.
Hey, so yesterday I was at the protest and I experienced a variety of things which does not really go along with what the police said, how they said they kept themselves professional. That did not happen at all. last night, one of the main things that I witnessed was someone who is currently now in a hospital. There's a protester in a hospital from what happened last night. I witnessed another person who wasn't actually trying to do anything to the police, but trying to provide support to the one who's now in the hospital. The police surrounded them and then started beating them with their sticks and then tackled him to the ground. And this is like not like someone the same height as even most of those police officers. Like they're really big guys who then tackled them onto the floor. Witnessing that just it was terrible.
Mhm.
And again, like the narrative that the police are trying to push is that they kept things all fine and they were just trying to keep control of the situation. They didn't keep control of anything. If anything, them charging at protesters, many of which were simply leaving just because some random ones were throwing water bottles, boo-hoo, a water bottle. It's just completely insane. And that's honestly the main thing I just wanted to leave with.
Thank you, Carlos. Please know that we hear you. And I would encourage anyone who feels aggrieved to contact our executive director, Jose Baptista, to file a complaint with this Para Board. All right, Sean, can we bring the next person up?
Yes, the next person is Justice Gaines. You're now unmuted.
Justice?
Thank you. I just want to echo what Carlos said. What I saw last night was a despicable show of force by the Providence police. They pushed protesters back from the public safety complex and then chased them past the schools and through Elmwood. They chased people. That's what they did. It was not about protecting a perimeter. It was not about defending themselves. It was about showing and intimidating young people who were out there because a young man was thrown off of his moped. And the way that they came at protesters, I saw a boy get tackled by about 8 to 15 police officers in front of Burger King. And I really don't care that people were throwing water bottles. Okay, there were a few firecrackers, there were a few fireworks. I was closer to some of them than the police were. But the fact that the police chose to continue charging at young people, they charged them across 4 blocks, if not more. That is an unacceptable behavior. And the fact that our city leadership could stand there and commend them for that behavior is utterly irresponsible during this time. And it must be understood that they did not conduct themselves well. They conducted themselves by showing their power and their strength, supposedly, against unarmed folks who were maybe finding rocks, right? But that's not a police baton. That's not a helmet. That's not tear gas. That's not having their dogs out. And my question that I would sincerely ask you all to ask the police chief is, why did they show up in riot gear in the first place? Because I've been to dozens of protests in Providence, and it seems like the only time they show up prepared with riot gear is when they know it's Black and brown people protesting.
Thank you, Justice. We will do just that. So appreciate you coming today and offering your thoughts about what is currently happening in our city. Sean, are there any other folks with their hands up?
Not at this time, Sheriff.
Not this time. Okay. So with that, we'll close public comment. We'll have the ability to have more public comment when we schedule the follow-up meeting for Wednesday next week. So all of you that have spoken tonight are more than welcome to come back and share additional thoughts if you would like to. With that said, we'll move to the other agenda item that I think, the only other agenda item that I think we'll be able to actually begin tonight, and that's the second one. So I'll turn it over to Jose Baptista, our Executive Director.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to the folks who commented and participated in the meeting. Something that I've been thinking about today and something I was planning on doing and now feel will be all the more appropriate is to make a formal request of the police department for police reports, all the police reports regarding all the arrests last night. And that would be something that we would like to review. I've heard a couple of comments about last night prior to this meeting. I was present for part of the evening in front of Knight Memorial Library. I didn't personally see anything that I would make a complaint about, but I have heard comments from different people, and I appreciate the people who spoke today. And so tomorrow, I will be submitting that request to the police department so that we can have an opportunity to review any and all police reports related to the arrest from last night so that we can have the opportunity to review those. I wanted to take an opportunity on agenda item number 2 and provide an update on at least the para side or the para perspective on what is taking place. Obviously, it's a very tragic situation, and we're all outside of the many complicated components that exist. There's at least one simple component, and that is that we all wish for the speedy and complete recovery of Mr. Jamal Gonsalves. It's obviously a very tragic situation, and I don't want to lose sight of the fact that there's a human being in the middle of all of this and that we all can unite in wishing the best for him. As far as the Paris perspective, I wanted to be clear. I have communicated with the board everything that I've done so far, and so I want to communicate the same to the public. As early as Monday morning, very early Monday morning, I had a brief conversation with the chief of police, Chief Clements, expressing that Para wants to exercise its role. And specifically, I want to talk about the statute, the Para ordinance, and I want to be clear about what it is that Para can do and what Para can't do. Under H2, subsection H2 of the Para ordinance, we have the authority to, quote unquote, monitor any internal investigation taking place at the police department. We do not have, neither under the ordinance nor under our capacity of resources, the ability to conduct an independent investigation of our own. What that means is, for example, if there is need to get something DNA tested or to test a blood sample or something really specific like that, we obviously don't have the capacity to do that. And so what we're trying to do is to maximize our ability to review what's happening. In the past, as recently as this summer, what has happened when we've exercised this subsection of the statute is that the city and the police department has interpreted that part of the statute to mean that we can simply review documents when the police department chooses, how the police department chooses, and they ultimately have the discretion what to show us and what to not show us. I have pushed back against that interpretation since the very beginning of my tenure as executive director. I have concern, and I've expressed to the police department and to the mayor and to the city council that I don't believe there should be any daylight in between what the city knows, what the mayor knows, what the police know, and what we know. In the past, and up until now, there has been daylight, obviously. The police department has given us some opportunities to review documents and videos and other investigations. And the reality is that this is a very high profile investigation. And so I am, as far as concrete update, I had been in conversation with the police department about setting up an initial briefing. We have not, I've had a couple of conversations with the police department about this case, and they've agreed to give us a briefing. And so we're in the process of scheduling that. I want to schedule it sooner rather than later. Part of that analysis is including our investigator in that, which I think is very important, and continuing to invest in our investigator because we're gonna need it, especially if we're gonna look into this case as seriously as it needs to be looked. If we're gonna look into the arrest that happened, we're gonna need to invest in investigative services. And so what is clear? Right now, we are in the process of scheduling an initial briefing. What I am getting resistance from on the city and police department is that they want to show us things after the fact. We have not been, the public will note, we have not been part of either of the 2 press conferences that have taken place so far. I think that we should have been. I think that we should have had conversations with the mayor and the attorney general, and I want us to be exactly on the same page. And the point that I've made to them, the point that I'll make publicly, is that there needs to be the civilian perspective at this table. And I'm not just saying that in a general sense. I'm not just saying that because I like how it sounds or because it's convenient. I'm saying that because in my tenure as executive director, I've seen, and we have seen, what the civilian perspective brings to the table. oftentimes when you have folks either in the legal community or the law enforcement community look at something, they're going to come up with one perspective. The civilian perspective is different. For example, you might look at key words like use of force or reasonable or probable, and the law enforcement community is going to look at it one way, and the civilian community is going to look at it another way. And again, that's not a theoretical point that I'm making. We have seen that concretely. The last high-profile investigation to take place, the investigation into the incident that took place on April 19, featuring Sergeant Handley, we just published our report, I think 2 weeks ago, and you can see that there are differences, notable differences between the information that was given to the public and the information that we thought was relevant through the review done by our investigator. And so I have expressed to the police department that having the opportunity to review documents after the fact or based upon the discretion of the police department, that's not good enough. Not in this case. This is obviously been very serious. We all believe in due process, where none of us are saying that nobody on this board, neither staff nor board member, is out here jumping to conclusions or making assumptions about things, but we need to be a part of the process. I've expressed to the mayor that I want to be at the table receiving information in real time. The same way, I listened very closely to the press conference from this morning, and we share the mayor's sentiment. We want to have an investigation that's complete, that is transparent, that is professional. And in order to do that, the civilian perspective needs to be at that table, and that's why PARA was created. And so I don't want to repeat myself too much, but I want to try to be as clear and as transparent as possible on what has happened and what I believe should happen. And so I'm encouraged that the police department seems ready, willing, and able to schedule an initial briefing with us. However, going forward, especially because some of the comments have been that this investigation is going to take weeks and months, going forward, I want to ensure that we settle for nothing less than being at the table, getting information in real time, because that is the role of this board. Obviously, the public is very engaged in this incident, very concerned about this incident, and I want to make sure that this board is able to execute its responsibility under city law and to the community. And so that is my update, again, with regard to what we are doing in this case. I'm happy to take any questions or thoughts from board members. I've certainly shared all that information and look forward to hearing your thoughts or recommendations on the same.
All right, thank you, Jose. Sean, if you could provide us with a warning towards the end of the meeting to make sure we just don't get cut off suddenly. So we're operating with a time frame. Jose, thank you for sharing that. Any comments? Jose, we're waiting to hear from public safety regarding briefing. Will this be a briefing to the full board, or how will it play out?
We can schedule it for the full board. If we do that, we'd obviously have to comply with open meetings laws and make sure that there's notice and everything like that. In fact, I had not thought about that until now.
Yeah.
What I had been initially discussing with the police department was scheduling something where at least, on the police department, we'd be speaking to Chief Clements and Commissioner Perry, and on our side, obviously myself and the executive committee, and any board members that were available. But thinking back, and now that you said that, I think the more appropriate course of action would be to set up a briefing similar to we did in early August for the Handy case, and do it that way. I think that might be more appropriate. So I'm glad you brought that up. And if folks are in agreement with that, I'm happy to kind of shift the conversation taking place now to, instead of doing a smaller briefing in person, we could probably set up a meeting like this. It likely have to take place in executive session due to the fact that it's an ongoing investigation, but I'm happy to coordinate that. And up until that point, we have agreement as to what should happen. What should happen thereafter, I think we're not necessarily on the same page, at least in my opinion. But up until that point, we have agreement. And so I'm looking forward to scheduling that and giving the board an opportunity to look into the facts of this case.
So I do have a question about, you said that if the matter is under investigation, is this matter under criminal investigation?
I mean, I don't want to speak specifically to that just because I haven't been told that. My assumption is that if the Attorney General is involved, that's at least one of the components that he might be looking at, but that's just strictly
Okay.
my thinking out loud. I
Yeah.
don't have any information about that.
And the reason I ask that is because if it's not a criminal investigation, then we should have this conversation in an open meeting.
Yeah. The last thing I'll say is something I alluded to, but I just want to be clear about. At this moment, I had asked Eugene to pause, essentially. He had been looking into the initial 12 complaints that we had voted into investigation. But due to the fact that we were having a conversation as to whether to continue funding investigations, I asked Eugene to pause because it doesn't make sense to ask somebody to do work that we're not sure he's going to get paid for. And so I would urge the board to not only to continue funding Eugene and his work, especially the amount of work we have to do now, but I would recommend, similar to what we did in the last fiscal year, to take that step and ask the Board of Contract and Supply to fund investigations to the tune of $50,000, $50,000, just so that we can operate with the confidence of knowing that we can continue to fund this. We have the money. Our budget, we're using the same budget as last fiscal year, which is $300,000. Of that, about 1/3 we know we're going to spend, and so we have the ability to do that. I would urge the board to again invest in investigative services, especially because there's been no moment where we need it more than right now.
Thank you. And we can certainly pick up that conversation next week. Okay, any other thoughts or comments that folks would like to share?
Hi, Sherman Figueroa, this is Panita. I was reading in the news today that the state police was also involved. Is that true, Nick and Jose? Is it also the AG and the state police is also involved in this investigation?
Yes, and I would go one step further. I've heard in the press conferences that the city has invited the Federal Department of Justice to be involved in this case as well. And so there's at least 3 bodies that are being involved to provide some sort of independence. The point that I've made to the mayor is that I'm glad to see that. However, all 3 of these bodies are law enforcement bodies, and it is important. The same way that you want to have that partnership and those allies come in to set, I think the quote was, an extra set of independent eyes, the civilian perspective needs to be equal. And at that table as well to be able to provide our independent set of eyes too.
Thank you. Elise?
Nick, there's another person in the attendees list that might want to speak.
Oh.
Also, I just received notification that Majority Leader Ryan has decided to cancel the ordinances committee meeting, so we can hold the full length of this meeting.
Hey, there we go. Very good.
So would you like me to unmute Mr. Garganta?
Yes, we can do that.
Mr. Garganta, and also Chair.
Can you?
I forgot to mention, Chair. Would you prefer that I just promote? It's your option. I can promote these individuals to panelists so that if they.
I can barely hear you, Sean. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. If you would like, I can promote the speakers to panelists so that they're visible on camera if they so desire to turn on their camera. Would you like me to do that?
Yeah, please.
And I apologize for not doing that earlier. So it's up to the individuals if they want to be, if they want to turn on their camera. But Mr. Garganta is now unmuted, and he is also visible if he desires.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. My question was, I heard that you were able to view documents. Are you able to view hard evidence as well, such as, in this particular case, the 2 vehicles that were involved in the accident?
Jose?
Question is if whether we're able to view the vehicle?
Yes.
I would imagine so. I want to be very specific. I would imagine that, if we asked, we'd be able to view it. We have not. How do I say this? It's taken some time sometimes. It's taken some back and forth sometimes but generally speaking, whatever we've asked to look at, we've been able to look at. And so if we asked, I don't know if I would physically go see where the car is. I imagine there's photographs or some sort of recording available to that end. But generally speaking, whatever we've been asked to look at, we can look at. Sorry, there's somebody loud driving by. I apologize about that.
Okay, thank you.
So the short answer is yes. Generally speaking, anything we've asked to look at, we've been able to. There was the example where we had to subpoena a video that we weren't allowed to look at. And so in the event that there was something that we weren't allowed to look at, we can always exercise that option. But the short answer is I imagine so.
Thank you.
All right, thank you for your question. Sean, there's no one else?
There are no additional hands raised. Actually, so someone has just raised their hand.
Okay.
So I'll promote Mr. Ford to panel. Mr. Ford, you are now promoted. You may unmute yourself if you so desire to speak.
Pat, you're on mute.
Pat Ford, would you like?
Hey, I'm sorry. I was wondering how, I apologize. I wondered, and I hope I'm not jumping in at the wrong time. I'm painfully bad at these Zoom meetings. How does one get the video of this?
Jose?
I'm sorry, one more time?
How does one get the video of this meeting?
The video of these meetings are posted on YouTube after they're done. I mean, they're recorded live, and I believe the city council has a channel or an archive where the video was posted. And so that will be available to the public, as well as all previous meetings that we've had as well.
Thank you very much. This is the first one I've attended, and I'm impressed by the professionalism and the clear dedication to the task at hand. I applaud your efforts.
Thank you so much.
Provide some additional information. For all of the attendees, you attended this meeting by using a link on the top of the agenda, which actually I'll just share real quick to make life easier. And in addition to the link that you used up here to join, this link can take you to our YouTube channel here. So if you are there, and right now this meeting is live streaming, so anyone going to that channel can watch it, and it will also be automatically recorded, so you could start watching it at any time in the future.
Thank you, Sean. Yes, can you leave the agenda up for a second?
Sure.
And just so that I'm understanding correctly, we're good to go through the full meeting?
Yes, sir.
Okay, very good. So next agenda item is the review and approval of minutes for the September 23rd board meeting. Did everyone get a copy of those minutes?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, does anyone need a minute to go back and review? Okay, I'll take that as a no. Is there a motion to accept those meeting minutes?
So moved.
Accept the meeting minutes.
I'm sorry. Who made the motion?
Elise made the motion.
Elise, okay.
Or Fanita, sorry.
Who second?
I'll second.
Okay. I'm sorry, it's hard to see when we're in this mode here. I can only see 4 people at a time.
Sorry, Anita.
It's okay. Any discussion?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Motion passes. Minutes have been approved. Our next item is the update relative to the APRA response policy. And for that, I'll turn it back over to our executive director.
Sure. I wanted to take an opportunity to speak to the access to. Hello?
Yep, we can hear you.
Oh, all the people kind of disappeared on my screen. But anyway, as long as you guys can hear me, that's okay. I wanted to take an opportunity to speak about the APRA, the Access to Public Records Act. Within the past 2 weeks, we received an APRA request for the video in the Sergeant Hanley investigation. Prior to that, earlier this summer, I believe in August, we received 2 similar requests. And so I wanted to speak to that just to make sure that everybody understands and we're on the same page. And I'm grateful to the City Law Department and specifically to Attorney Eddie Lee Straub, who joined us in a small Zoom meeting to help clarify some of the nuances about the APRA law. We are not in any way, shape, or form trying to hide anything or be inconsistent. The reality is, and I wanted to ask the Vice Chair if he would be willing, who was present at that meeting with the Attorney Straub, if he'd be willing to speak on what we discussed during that meeting. But the very general, the point that I wanted to make, both to the board and to the public, regarding APRA, the Access to Public Records Act. Whenever anybody makes a request to us or any department in the city, the law department has issued a policy that says that for matters of consistency and legality and liability and making sure that everybody's on the same page, that all APRA requests have to go through the city law department. And so to the extent that there was any journalists or folks in the community waiting for us to respond, I have forwarded any request that I received to the law department. I did my best ability to play devil's advocate and to see to what extent PARA could respond to our own. And the reality is that there's a city policy for good reason, and we should comply with that, for lack of a better word. It's certainly a complicated matter. It's certainly something that I think deserves looking into and legally analyzing, which is why I spent time looking into it and wanted to be transparent with the board and the law department. But ultimately, we did not respond to them for ourselves. We just forwarded them to the law department based on the law department's policy. And so, Mr. Vice Chair, if I missed anything or if you thought there was anything else that was notable from that meeting that the public and the board should know, I would ask if you could please elaborate.
No, I think you covered everything. I believe that Eddie was pretty clear that any APRA request would have to go through the city law department and that they would have 10 days to respond, and that reception of an APRA request wasn't a guarantee to receive information. It was simply to have an understanding that there was a request made for the information. And so I think that she was pretty clear. I think you covered everything the way it was presented to us.
Okay, any questions, comments? All right, Jose, thank you for sharing that with us. Vice Chair as well. Does someone have a question? No, okay. Sean, if we could put the agenda back up, please. All right, our next item up is the review and discussion and potential vote related to the PARA report related to the investigation on April 19th. So, Jose, I think this one is yours as well.
Surprise, surprise. So first and foremost, I'll stay on this agenda item. We don't necessarily, if I'm not mistaken, we don't necessarily have a vote planned. However, the thinking was to put the language in there just in case the board wanted to make a vote as to this investigation. I want to take a step back because prior to Sunday evening, our main focus was the releasing of the review that we did into the April 19 incident featuring Sergeant Hanley and the report that we published. I have asked, first and foremost, I want to acknowledge and thank Eugene for his excellent work on that report. There have been many questions about what it is that PARA does, what it is that PARA is supposed to do. And when I'm advocating for the civilian perspective to be part of any investigation, this report is an example of what I mean. As an attorney, I've seen again how we can kind of get caught up in what the law is, of how what the practices are. But I think the purpose here at PARA is to make sure that the civilian perspective is at the table. And for this being our very first report, our very first high-profile investigation looking into, I think that our investigator did an excellent job, and I wanted to appreciate him for that. For the people, and generally speaking, for the folks on the board or in the community who have been asking me what's next in that sense, on the one hand, we've had discussions about the fact that PARA is in a sense somewhat limited in terms of our authority under the statute. We can review investigations, and my argument is that that review should in some cases happen simultaneously, not be a review after the fact, but a review of what's happening at the moment. And we can make recommendations to the city. We obviously don't have the power to vote and enforce these recommendations, but through our relationships with the city council office, through our relationships with the mayor's office and state legislature, we can advocate for these changes. And so now that we've published that report to the public, what we'll be working on and what we are working on is trying to implement some of the changes we recommended. I would say that the changes that were recommended in, or at least the recommendations that were made in the report, are at least threefold. There are a number of Providence Police Department policies that have come into question with this case, with the April 19 case. One of them is Providence Policy 200.39, the duty to report information. We found that there was a lack of that in this case, that there was, I don't want to misstate the facts. I'm glad that Eugene did such a good job accumulating them. I don't want to state them differently, but the bottom line is that here there could have been a better job done reporting what happened on this scene. That was obviously very concerning. Another policy under the umbrella of policies, which is point number one, would be 200.2, obedience to laws and rules. We want to, with each one of these policies, as we're empowered to do in the law, we want to engage with the police department, make recommendations for changes, and in this case, try to evaluate and analyze what is it that happened, how is it different from the policy, and why did that happen, and what we can do to make sure this doesn't happen again. And the third is obviously 300.01, which is use of force, right? There are clearly some uses of force here that were outside of the ambit of what we would expect to be reasonable or appropriate in that case. And so use of force is a very complicated topic. I mean, it's under the law. And that's, again, underscores the significance of having the civilian perspective at the table, right? Sometimes we need to separate from what it is that is the legal analysis and just ask the basic fundamental questions from a civilian perspective, like, is this okay? You know, I know in years past, there've been conversations about whether it's ever appropriate to pull a person by their hair, right? You might be able to way to analyze it under the use of force and say that it is, but that fundamental question should be asked, right? Like, how are we treating human beings? So that would be point number one in terms of our recommendations and things that we're looking into. Point number two is above policy. What are the city ordinances that are in play, right? It's one thing if you don't comply with your own policy, that's one thing, but if you're not complying with the law, that's a separate thing, right? And so looking into the same topics in terms of use of force and duty to intervene, this summer, in the wake of George Floyd, there's been a bunch of examples across the country, New York State, Colorado, passing new ordinances that help prevent these sorts of situations for the future. So that's point number two. And point number three is body-worn camera. It's something we've been thinking about, something we've been talking about. A reason why we need to complete the investigations to those first 12 cases. One thing we discussed with the mayor's office, when we've repeatedly brought up these concerns about whether the body cams are being worn, is what is the evidence, right? What is the sample size? How do we know when they've been worn and not? And so in this case, there was an issue with body-worn camera. We have some complaints that we're looking into. We want to see in how many of those cases is that a problem, and ultimately, just like the other policies, improve that. And so that's what we are looking into in terms of the Hanley investigation. There's certainly a number, like I said, of good examples across the country. Baltimore is another one. And so we want to implement those good ideas and good policies, essentially to make sure that we can help create a system where something like this situation never happens again.
All right, Jose, thank you. Any questions or comments? Very good. Sean, I think, oh, go ahead.
Actually have something to say about that.
Yep.
To the question of policies, we know that violations of policies are taking place all the time. We know that there are volumes and volumes of policies that are on the books. They had the Commission for the Accreditation of Law Enforcement Agencies come through. Chief Clemens corrected me. I said that there was a 180-point process. He said it was a 187-point process. So they have a litany of things on the books. The problem is no one is being held to account. No one is enforcing them. So this isn't something for us to do as a board because we don't have the teeth or the power to do so. We have monitoring ability, we have recommendation ability, and that's it. So the only people who can actually really make something happen are the people who are actually writing the ordinances for the city. And so there has to be some sort of a codification of when these violations take place, what actual punishments will follow. I hear a lot of conversation about duty to intervene. There was a duty to intervene in the city of Minneapolis on the books since 2016. So that didn't save George Floyd. So the idea that if we just keep, milling through and talking about this, it's my values tell me that there has to be not just an account of the officers who are doing this, but the officers or the commanders who are reviewing this behavior. Because we keep referring to this as the Hanley case. There were other people who were involved, as we all know, that probably that should be punished, but they're not because the focus is being drawn to Hanley and not to the larger picture. Why was Hanley there in the first place? Why was there a 2-minute and 14-second gap in that video? So those are things that aren't being discussed. So while we're talking about policies, we need to be real and recognize this isn't being addressed in the places that it really needs to be addressed, and that's in the laws.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. Sean, I think we've lost Miss Deb.
Can I jump in on this
Yep.
subject before we move on?
Yep,
So there was between last meeting and this current meeting, there was some things that happened relating to this specific report. And I just want to kind of put on the record what happened and what we might need to or want to do in the future. So as you guys know, in August, when we had the executive session with the police department, we reviewed the video, reviewed Eugene's report. This board voted to release that report upon my legal review. There was just some discussion about some board members being concerned about names or addresses or personally identifiable information that was contained in the report that we maybe wanted to redact before it was released. I did that review, and in the meantime, before it was released to anyone and me doing the review, a reporter asked for that report. And it was at that time that I worked with Jose and the chairman to kind of finalize my edits and release that report in accordance with the vote that this board took. At that right before we were going to respond to this reporter, I kind of shot out an email to the board, just letting everyone know, hey, we got this request. I've instructed Jose to release the report. I've done my, the redactions that were discussed. And at that point, some board members expressed a desire to change the report, not in substance, but by adding sort of a disclaimer that the report was based on, Eugene's opinions, Eugene's review of the documents, and not necessarily reflective of findings of fact by the board. And I think that makes sense. But I didn't want to include that, or I didn't want to advise that language be included in the report, because that was not what we discussed at the meeting. And it was not what we discussed in terms of what my legal review or edits would be. So we did not include those changes. And my advice was that we release the report as it was and as the board voted to and as the board discussed. But going forward, if we want to make sure that that sort of language is included in an investigative report, we need to do it at the time that it's approved to be released by the board, if that all makes.
Thank you, Jillian. I think for me, and folks can chime in, for me, if we're, if we're paying an investigator to do to carry out an investigation for para, then that report should have para's name on it, and not necessarily be one that's where we're saying, hey, we have this investigative report, but it belongs to this person and it is in the opinion of this person. We're actually paying for that report. So it's actually a document that belongs to para and shouldn't have such disclaimer. The report has to be approved by this board, right? So we get to look at it, and then at that point we can determine whether or not we're all in agreement with moving forward and report as we did back in August. So I just wanted to, I see your hand, Susan. Okay. But, I think that's something that we should own fully as an organization, as we are paying an investigator to do that work for us. Susan?
Yeah, my concern was that there should be a disclaimer that just said, based upon the information provided to us, that the report was generated, because as Mr. Montero had explained to the board, that it was his feeling that there might have been some other reports out there that were not shared with us that might have potentially changed some of the recommendations or the findings in the report. So that was the disclaimer that I thought should have been there, that we can do in the future, if that's his feeling. Thanks.
Eugene?
Yeah, I just want to touch bases on that. And again, this goes back to the fact of how the information was received, that if we choose to do a monitoring of any internal investigation, we should have access to everything. As far as whether any reports would have changed the results, everything that was reported was based on facts that were given to us through our review. Nothing in there was an opinion. It's all based on facts. I agree with Susan's point that if we, as far as additional information, if we actually make a request or we decide to do a monitoring of internal, we should request everything so that we have a full understanding. But I, again, then agree with the chair that I've never been in a situation where I was hired to do an investigation and it was based on an opinion. It's only based on facts that are given, and then that report is presented to whatever body, entity, or company that I would be working for, and that's who owns the product.
Thank you, Eugene. Susan, I think that's a good recommendation. Jillian, thank you as well. Appreciate your time. All right, any other?
No problem.
Thank you. Any other? All right, we'll move on to the next agenda item. Sean, if you'll put that back up on the screen.
One moment.
Yep, Susan?
Chairman, I just see that there is a participant that's had their hand up for a while. One of our attendees.
Do we know who that is?
Screen just disappeared. It's just a bunch of numbers, LG G-pad. I don't know who it is.
Okay. Do we need them to identify for the record, for the public record?
We do. We can ask them to do that. There's, this might be just a Providence citizen, but there's always a risk that we don't know who this person is, as it doesn't have a normal name. So if you, I could unmute them briefly to see if they will present their name and some relative thoughts. It's up to you, Chair.
And I'm sorry, I had started to say earlier to make sure that the record reflects that Ms. Deb is unfortunately no longer in the meeting. Hopefully she comes back, maybe having some tech issues. Yeah, let's let this person into the room and then have them identify themselves for the record, and we can try to address whatever it is that they're bringing.
Okay, could the person who has their hand raised please state your name and preferably your address for the record and provide your comments? The person who is joining, it looks like with an iPad, we are trying to unmute you. Please state your name. You are now unmuted. Will you please state your name, the person who was raising their hand, or state that you no longer wish to speak? All right, I don't hear anyone speaking, Chair. We can.
Yep, I think we should move on. Thank you. All right, again, if you could put the agenda up. Okay, next, item number 6, discussion and potential vote regarding the Providence External Review governance plan. And for this, I will turn it over to Elise.
Hi, folks. So ultimately, I don't think that we need to vote on it because I had sent an email out over the weekend with everyone's input and then asked for feedback to find out if there was any changes or further recommendations that they would make. So, and I didn't receive any extra feedback, so we can certainly have this discussion here or bring it back online, totally up to you. But ultimately, there were 2 buckets. One was monthly and ongoing reporting, and the other was just consistent procedures. And so a monthly report from the executive director at the top of every one of our meetings, explaining basically our financial standing, personnel changes, any complaints with a high-level overview of complaint stage gates, things like that, essentially giving us an idea of the number of cases that we have in intake, in investigation, mediation, resolved, etc. So we just kind of have metrics to go off of every month, as well as any relative PPD updates or any information relevant, whether it's something happening in a different state or just policing in general, things like that, that we might need. I'm going to leave it there for a second to see if anybody has anything to say or add.
Yeah, Susan.
Thank you, Elise, for preparing this. Can we add outreach activities to the monthly reporting?
I mean, sure.
Okay. And then let's see. And also under the PPD updates, any police policy changes and the executive director's review of those policy changes? I know that they send over in the quarterly report that whole list. I mean, and it's just long. So anything that might affect us.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. Anyone else?
Elise, I'm sorry, go ahead.
And do you intend for these to be part of our bylaws?
That is up to the board. That wasn't I was just trying to get a cadence so we had continuous information and communication moving forward. But if it's something that you want to put in the bylaws, it's certainly something that we can bring up for vote.
Okay, thank you.
And just remember, any changes to bylaws require at least 30 days in advance notice.
I would, if I can just speak to that issue, what I understand, and Jill, please correct me if I'm wrong, the 30-day requirement was only true the very first time we established the bylaws. I remember us specifically going through all that hassle to get an ad in the newspaper and do all these things. And in the course of that conversation, we were told, I mean, I hope I'm not making it up, but I guess it's possible, that if we ever wanted to change the bylaws again, we would not need to go through all of that work. You know, not that we want to be, intransparent, but you could understand the inefficiency of every single time we want to change the bylaws to have a public hearing about it, right? We can certainly make it open to the public hearing in this meeting, but Mr. Clerk or Jill, City Solicitor, if you guys can clarify that point. I don't think that that's the case anymore.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So Jose, I agree that it's not entirely efficient. However, the ordinance does say that amendments to the bylaws also need to be done at a public hearing. So we would have to go through the same process of putting an ad in the paper, doing the 30-day notice. We have to go through that whole process again anytime you make an amendment. So I know you guys are compiling ideas and thoughts that you guys have. So if, with that in mind, I would make sure that we're adding and changing everything at one time, so we don't have to do that all the time. But yes, unfortunately, and I say unfortunately from an efficiency standpoint, I see your point, but yes, that is the same process for all of the amendments.
Well, two things. Thank you for clarifying that. And two things I would say. One, I think the efficiency.
Oh, you froze.
Well, while he's frozen, I'll let you know. Miss Deb said she can see and hear, but she can't be heard. And Mr. Fontaine said that he just got back to his house from a court case, and he's trying to prepare some documents. And if we can just forward him what's taking place this evening, that'd be great.
All right. Thank you, Matisse. Jose, if you can hear us, we can't hear you. You're frozen. You may want to log off and log back in. All right, so until Jose is able to come back into the room, I know this particular item is up for a vote tonight. You know, I think Susan just provided some valuable components to it, and I think we may need a little more time to kind of put some more ideas into this. At least, would you be comfortable with having us provide you feedback by, let's say, Friday of next week?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And then I have a procedural piece of this as well. So that was the reporting out at the monthly meeting, and then I have the procedures that would help facilitate better governance. If you would like me to wait for Jose, I can, or we can.
Yeah. Let's wait for Jose to return, and please let the record show that Ms. Deborah Ray is back in the meeting. By the way, thank you for taking this on. Really appreciate it. I think it's something that we need on this board, and we've been so busy with so many other things that we've kind of, missed this one, and I'm glad you were able to pick it up and start constructing it.
Happy to help.
Would you like to see the agenda again, Mr. Chair?
Yes, please. Yes. Thank you. Just a point of clarification, because this was on the agenda for a vote, right? Is it just fine to table the discussion to the next meeting, or do we need to follow through on the procedural portion of this?
You can continue any of the items if you'd like.
I'm sorry, we can continue? Okay. Well, we're not ready to vote on it, is what I'm saying. Should we still vote on it?
You can continue. Yes, you can have a motion. Which item specifically are you?
This is number 6.
No, if you, it's up to you. You don't necessarily need a motion or a vote. If you're finished discussing this item, you can go on to the next item.
Okay, so we'll table this discussion to the next meeting. Elise, I don't know if you wanted to just quickly go through the procedural point you were trying to make, or if you're good.
I mean, the board members have it, and if we're going to discuss it publicly in the next month with everyone's feedback already, then I just encourage anybody who has feelings or thoughts about it to just respond to me.
Yes.
and
Okay.
Provide feedback.
So the deadline to respond back to Elise, and I include myself in this deadline, is Friday, October 30th by close of business, 5 p.m. Please. Thank you so much. All right, so we will move to the next agenda item, which we definitely need our executive director in the room for, and that's the discussion and vote to extend the contract for investigative services. It says here continued from September 23rd. So I was unable to attend the last board meeting. I was dealing with some back issues, took a lot of Advil and pain medication to get myself through that. But unfortunately missed this discussion. Did someone want to provide sort of the spirit of that? And then when Jose comes back, we can kind of jump into the full discussion. Oh, Jose's here. Hey, okay.
I mean, I am here, but this was not my agenda item. I don't remember who brought it up or who's was the discussion here, but I think I've made clear what my point is earlier in the meeting, and if anybody has things to say or to offer a perspective, by all means, take it away.
So who placed that, who made that recommendation?
I think Mr. Rankin and Mr. Fontaine had asked for some additional information from the last meeting.
Vice Chair?
Yeah, I had reached out to the executive director. We still had some questions. Some of us still had some questions. Mike and I had some questions about paying for as far as with investigations, because if the contractor is going to the police station on behalf of the executive director and is being paid as he's investigating, that's not an investigation. So we can call that quibbling, we can call that nitpicking, we can call it whatever, but it's a legitimate question. The other aspect of it was the amount that was being paid, because the question was, should we be paying $100 an hour for these services? And if we're going to do that, should we not find whether or not we could hire someone else, or at least put a request for proposal out to see what other individuals were available to do investigations? If we're complaining or saying that we don't have enough staff to do these investigations, should we not have a pool of investigators? And I can understand how someone would say, well, you're talking about spending too much, but then you're talking about wanting to hire more people. I'm saying we only got one person. We never had a pool of candidates. We had one person brought to us. So we don't know what else is out there. We don't know who else is out there.
Okay, so just so that I'm understanding correctly, the first point that you made is if you're saying if the executive director sends an investigator to the department, someone who's contracted as a consultant.
If the executive director sends a contractor to the police department in a role for the executive director that he is supposed to be fulfilling, right? So if he's supposed to be going to a meeting, but he sends the investigator instead, should we pay the investigator to attend that meeting? And that was a question. Because there had been some things where in the invoice that was presented, that it was like attended a meeting, and it was like, well, was that a meeting that the investigator, that the contractor was supposed to be attending, or was that a meeting that the executive director was supposed to be in attendance at?
Okay, so my question would be then, were those meetings attended as part of the investigation?
That's my question as well.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jose.
So my short answer to that is I don't think, at least as far as I know, and if folks have evidence otherwise, by all means, I can address it. I don't think I've ever sent or asked Eugene to go to the police department for anything other than something related to an investigation. I mean, why else would he go to the police department? I mean, he's not talking about baking cookies with those folks. He's talking about what are the records? Can I have the records? Can I have the reports? Getting briefed by Major Perez on certain cases. And so I can't remember an instance where I asked Eugene to go to the police department for something other than an investigative matter. What I think is also within the question is, well, let me take a stop there. That's my short answer to the question.
I would imagine that I would imagine it didn't have anything to do with baking cookies. I would imagine it would have something to do with the work of para in some way, shape, or form. So it was trying to discern what that was. So appreciate it.
Okay, Susan?
Thank you. There was also a conversation about whether there would be a need for a full or a part-time investigator. So we were looking for an analysis of exactly how much work that we thought that there would be based upon a lot of our current complaints.
So I'll share what my perspective is on it. And first and foremost, as I've said before, I think Eugene is somebody who's supremely qualified, not just because of his work experience, but because in all of the people that I know in the law community and law enforcement community, Eugene is unique in that he has not only relationships, but trust in both the community and the police department. And I know a big part of what we're supposed to do is to be impartial. And to that end, I think that's one of the most impressive parts of Eugene's background and why I feel so strongly about having him. I think that if you were to look at the past, I've been executive director for almost 2 whole years. In March, it'll be 2 whole years. If you look at the beginning half of the work, I would say that in terms of a need for a full-time investigator, maybe at the beginning it was flatline because we were building the process and trying to figure out what our actual needs were. And that's why we took such a long time before making any staffing decisions, because we didn't know what our needs were. As we've filled in the outline, if you will, which, as I've stated before, the timeline, it took us about a year between March 2019 that I started and March this year to lay the groundwork, if you will, to meet with the police union, meet with the police leadership, meet with the community, kind of get everybody on the same page, because investigating the police, especially doing it in a meaningful way, was work, right? I could have gone in there and tried to put my foot down on day one, but we had to build the consensus amongst this board, build a working relationship with the police department, which is why it's important to have somebody as qualified as Eugene. So it took a while to get there. At that point, in that first year, we didn't need a full-time investigator, which is why I never brought it up. Unfortunately, coronavirus kind of threw a wrench in our plans and it delayed us by a couple of months. And then by the time we got to May and June, we were focused on the April 19 investigation. I think at this point, and even prior to Sunday, at this point, I feel, based on my experience doing this work, that we have need for a full-time investigator. Eugene has been kind to us, not only in charging us a fee that is a lot less than he could be charging and a lot less than he charges other folks, but also in being judicious in what he charges us for. There are tons of things that Eugene has done and tons of advising that he's done that he hasn't charged us for because he's that passionate about the work. And so between the dozen or almost 24 cases that we have to look into ourselves, between cases like the Sergeant Hanley investigation and now the October 18 incident that just happened, there is quite a bit of need. So that's point number one. Point number two is the budget issue is frustrating because, as you know, and because of coronavirus, basically the entire country in terms of government is in the same place. Nobody knows what our funding is going to be because we don't know what the future is going to be. So we're operating on the same budget that we had in the prior fiscal year. As you all know, I made a proposal to this board, not a proposal to the board, but I shared with this board what my proposal was to the city. And we were trying to double our budget, which would include a full-time investigator. I wish that we were in that situation, but in the meantime, since we're working on such a limited budget, I don't know that we can have, or at least I don't know that we can adequately pay a full-time investigator. What I would like to do while we figure out what our long-term finances is what I recommended earlier, the same step that we took last year, which is to say, basically to spend the money that we have, to allocate our own money. We know that anytime we want to allocate more than $5,000, we need the city to give us the authorization to do that. I think that we should invest to the tune of $50,000. Based on $100 an hour, what is that, 5,000 hours? That's a lot of work. And I don't want to ramble, but I believe strongly, not only in Eugene, but in the fact that we need to do this work. And this weekend only underscores how much work there is to do. I mean, I am pushing for the police department and the mayor and the city council to put us at the table so that we can be there in real time. If we had been in that position for the past 3 days, there's a good chance that Eugene might have put in 30 hours within the past 3 days. And so if we're gonna talk the talk and being in terms of being involved and being independent and impartial, I think we need to walk the walk, and that means investing in this investigator.
Susan?
Oh, let me just, Jose, so out of the total amount of complaints that we have right now, what's the total amount of open complaints? And how many have we suggested for investigation?
How many have been
Yeah, do you know what the total is right now?
voted
How
to
many?
investigating?
Yeah, what we voted to investigate.
So I'll put it into two different buckets. The first batch, if you will, that we've actually turned over to the police department to begin that work is 12. The portfolio that Eugene was actively working on is 12. I don't have the number of what the second half is that we have not turned over yet, just because he hasn't finished that, but I would anticipate it's around 12 also. So we have at least 12 and about as high as 24 cases that we can look into. At least the investigating component. This is not even talking about the mediation component.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Vice Chairman Rankin, you had a second point you were making. Just want to make sure that we're able to get through that.
You know, as I said, there were questions about how the time was being spent. There were questions about how the money was being spent. That's it.
Okay.
So, I mean, if we're going to look at just one individual as our only prospect for being an investigator, I don't think that we looked at a pool of individuals. We didn't. So that's my point. And I mean, we can talk about what a great job he did. I've known Eugene for years. I think he did a good job. I just wonder if we have other individuals that could be doing a better job.
Understood. All right. So thank you for sharing that, first of all. I think as a board, and I've said this, I believe I've said this a couple of times already, our job is to provide governance to the executive director. And I just want to make sure that we're clear that any personnel matters, hiring or not hiring, removing, that fall under the discretion of the executive director remain as an operational portion of the responsibility that that person bears. So for us, I think it's okay to have these discussions and to talk about how we may perceive things, but at the end of the day, it's really up to the discretion of the executive director as to who we hire and who we don't hire. Any other thoughts or comments? Questions?
Yes, Chairman Figueroa, it's Panita.
Yes.
Hello.
I think we have Ms. Ray also trying to speak. Okay. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. So I agree with Susan that I would like to see more analysis done before we're starting to talk about possibly hiring a full-time investigator. I believe there needs to be more of analysis to bring upon the board to see if that is a need. So I would like to see possibly within the next board meeting or a continuation of this topic. I mean, right now, we still need an investigator. And I believe my fellow board, would agree that we should continue to have Eugene be our investigator, but the question is, do we need a full-time investigator or not? And I believe there should be a in-depth analysis presented to the board, perhaps at the next board meeting or at the December's board meeting.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. I know I've spoken to Eugene a bunch about it. I think what I can do is two things. One, perhaps I was going to ask, well, on the one hand, I'd love to ask whether it's legally permissible under this agenda to take a vote now or to propose now that we allocate a certain amount of money to investigating. I don't know if that's permissible on the agenda. If it's not, or maybe on the one hand, maybe the more prudent course of action is to wait till the next board meeting to present the documentation of the specifically he's asking. On the other hand, understand my dilemma here, where we are literally in the middle of a hurricane. We're in the eye of a hurricane, where all this work taking place, and I feel weary about going another month before we address this funding issue, because, you know, if and when that magical moment comes where the mayor and the commissioner all say, you know what, Jose, we agree with you, we're gonna put you at the table, get ready to do this work. I wanna be able to say, okay, Eugene, let's go, and to have that confidence that we can issue that payment. And so if the board is willing to have that conversation now, in terms of allocating some amount of money, or at least giving me permission to ask the Board of Contract and Supply to allocate that money, I'd love that. If the board would rather wait until the next board meeting to get the analysis that I can formulate with Eugene and then take that vote, obviously it's up to the board, but I would advocate that we do it sooner rather than later, just because there is a lot of work that is likely coming our way very soon.
Thank you, Jose. Susan, hold on one second.
Sure.
Just letting the record show that Mike Fontaine has joined the meeting. Go ahead, Susan.
Right, so Jose, we had already approved $5,000, I believe it was like last February, and then you went to the Board of Contract and Supply for another 50. So that gave you $55,000 to play with, and you spent like 21. So you still have 34.
No, because that was the previous fiscal year. What we don't use, we give back.
Okay, so I thought because the budget hadn't been approved yet, everything was just kind of flowing one into the other.
I wish, and part of what I thought about was how to deal with that, because I wanted to do exactly what you're saying, take that 34 and do it. But what I understand, and if anybody has any information otherwise, please say it, whatever, you know, when June 30 of this past summer came, whatever we didn't spend goes back to the city, and then we start fresh. I think our budget was 341 total in the previous fiscal year, and so we start again. And as far as I know, this fiscal year, since July 1, I have not allocated that $5,000 payment to Eugene. I've intended to, but in the sake of transparency and want to make sure I talk to the board before I push that button, I wanted to make sure that everybody's on the same page. And so that's my understanding. And I've asked a lot of people, because I share your point, right? It was a deep frustration to me that on June 30, we didn't spend $200,000, and all that goes back to the city and they call it a surplus or whatever it is. So as far as I know, we don't have that money to spend. If we do, hallelujah, we'll do it. But what I think we need to do is go back to the Board of Contract and Supply, and I'll look into that and make sure that we have the right answer.
Okay.
Jose, that is, sorry, that is correct. Whatever you don't spend does go back to the city, and you do start over.
All right, thanks, Jillian.
Thank you.
At first, I wasn't going to really comment on this subject, but I think it's important, because whatever the board decides to do, I'm absolutely okay with. If the vice chairman thinks that there's a better person qualified, absolutely, we should have at it. What I would say that I think there's also a truly misunderstanding what an investigation is and what it takes to complete. There's a lot of dialogue, there's a lot of conversation. And to be honest, as a contractor, or any time that I have done this work in the past, every time I pick up the phone to call somebody, schedule an appointment, to schedule a meeting, that's chargeable hours of time. Every time I visit a site, every single thing. And if I truly charge the time that I've put in since being part of this process, the money that was allocated would be gone. And although I can respect, because I'm a very fiscal, responsible individual, so I appreciate the conversation, but it's also very frustrating when we understand the amount of work, and I agree with the analysis to decide whether or not there should be a full-time or part-time, but I could tell you that currently you're not being charged what you should. And anybody you bring in who may not be as connected or have the passion to do the work is going to charge you accordingly. And again, I say that, and I think the board should definitely evaluate and decide what they're going to do. I'm not doing this work because like there's a need for me. I'm doing this work because I understand the need and how I feel passionate about this type of work. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Martell. All right, very good. Any other questions or comments? So I think we've left this at, Jose, your request was to see if we could take a vote this evening. That would require, I believe that would require an amendment to the agenda. I will ask if someone is willing to present that motion. If not, then we will continue forward with the agenda. Is there a motion?
Can I just ask what
Yeah.
what are you actually trying to do? Because you might, what is the motion that you're seeking to have done right now?
What I would ask the board to do, if you were so willing, is to authorize me to go to the Board of Contract and Supply and submit, I don't know what the technical language for the document is, but whatever, I did it last year. Again, I don't want to misname it, but to ask the Board of Contract and Supply to let us spend our own money in excess of $5,000 towards investigative services. And so the document that I did last year was something like $50,000. I would recommend doing that again, or at least the board authorizing me to ask the Board of Contract and Supply. Because in theory, the Board of Contract and Supply could say no, right? And so you're just authorizing me to ask them. If the board, obviously, whatever number the board feel comfortable with, you can take that vote, but that's what I'm asking for the board to vote on.
I don't think that for that type of motion, I don't think you need to amend your agenda, because the agenda item is discussion and vote to extend contract for investigative services. That's the topic that you're talking about. If the motion is just Jose going to Contract and Supply to ask for, however much money that is related to the investigative services, you don't need to amend your agenda for that. You just make that motion.
And I'll just say as one thing qualifying, and I said it at the last meeting and I'll say it now, I take this work very seriously. I don't know that folks realize this, but I am responsible for submitting my own hours to the city. And if you looked at my own hours since the day I started, there's never been a single pay period that I've allocated any more than the traditional 35 hours a week that I work. Even though in a case like tonight, I'm clearly working more than 35 hours, but I take spending money with the utmost seriousness. And I'm willing to obviously do the governance plan and document every single penny. I think Eugene did an extraordinary job doing the same. And so when I ask for this, understand that I take it with the utmost seriousness, and I'm happy to comply with the board requirements and documenting every single dime. There's 0% shady business or frivolousness. Eugene and I are not having steaks at the Capitol Grill or anything like that. And so I just wanted to underscore how seriously I take this and how much I would appreciate the board authorizing us. It would give us a lot of space, because like I said, I've asked Eugene to pause. I don't want him to do work that I can't promise I'm going to pay him for. And so if we do this, we can move forward on the 12 initial cases that we were investigating. We can move forward with confidence and knowing that we can participate in this October 18 matter. And ultimately, we'll get a better sense of what our needs are, so that when hopefully coronavirus is over and we have a nice bigger budget, we can have the information we need to assess the full-time investigator we need.
Excuse me, this is just Mike chiming in here. Sorry, I came in, I've been in court. I got some stuff I got to prepare for. So I only got part of this conversation. I think it was regarding money and raises and stuff like that. But I believe last time we had a conversation about this last meeting, we had talked about basically taking an accounting of what is actually being done and getting a handle on how much work is involved before we did anything. And I'm not sure what context we're discussing that in, but I think that this would be related to it. And again, I know I'm showing up late here, but has that been taken care of? Do we have an idea of these different things? And if someone can kind of chime in on that, I'd appreciate it.
I'll say two things to that, Michael. To the extent that we documented the work that has been done and what we've spent money on, I shared Eugene's list of expenses at the last board meeting. What you're saying is true. There was a conversation about whether we should, I guess, fund, or to what extent we should fund the investigator. And the two options that we were kind of pushing back and forth just before you got on was we can either postpone that conversation to the next board meeting so that we can present some sort of analysis and show what the money is being spent on or what we need to do, et cetera. Or the latter part is I'm just simply asking if the board we're willing to make some sort of vote tonight just because of the work that's coming our way, especially not only the work that we already had to do, the cases we're investigating, but now especially with this weekend's incident and how much work is likely coming our way. I am weary of going another month without having that security of knowing that we can pay for that work. And so either we can do it at the next board meeting, but I'm asking if the board will consider doing it tonight. Either way, it's your call.
Elise?
I just want to clarify, Jose, if we don't extend this contract, we don't have an investigator to look into the situation on Elmwood Avenue. Is that correct?
No, we will. The question is, you know, I don't want to. I think that these meetings that are taking place, they take hours at a time, right? And so knowing that we have a ceiling of $5,000 and Eugene has already done work, at least $2,000 work, I don't want to go the next 30 days knowing that I can only promise him we're going to pay him $3,000. I want to be able to know, listen, we have at least 25, 30, 40,000, whatever, so that we don't have to worry about how many hours he's putting in. We can kind of work with a little bit of flexibility is what I'm saying. We'll have him, but we're a little bit up against the wall if in that sense. Okay.
Susan?
I'd actually be in favor of waiting until the next meeting, only because we did ask for a lot of this information, including a job description at the last meeting, and haven't seen it. So I think that we should hold off until the next meeting until we've gotten a lot of this information before we go ahead and approve.
Well, I would clarify one thing. As far as I understand, a job description would be for us potentially posting this to be a full-time position. I think that what we're talking about is a little bit different, at least considering to fund this structure, because we honestly don't have the money under this budget to post a full-time position. So that's why we haven't gone the route of the job description.
Yeah, I realize it's just that all the information regarding an investigator, the information that we asked for, we haven't seen yet, including this analysis that a few of us have spoken about. I mean, you have another $3,000 there. I mean, right now, you know, the information that you're going to get, I think that you've been the one that's been in contact with the police department, so you should be securing that information, and then it go to an investigator for analysis. Just my opinion.
No, I would fall into something of that nature as well. I mean, I just said, like I said, that we said last time, we're going to try to get our ducks in a row. And we said last time that, you know, we talked about processes and protocols and all the other stuff that we need to actually get this board ship shape. I don't really see, I mean, that hasn't happened yet for whatever reason. I would agree that we should follow that protocol so we have an idea of what exactly we're doing. You know, what duties are the investigative duties versus we're paying for any duty. I mean, what are we doing? What are we talking about? I don't think we ever clarified that. And I think that if we want this board to live beyond next month or any other month thereafter, we really need to get a hold of everything. And I know, Elise, you started putting some stuff together, but I still think that's something we need to do. So I think trying to not doing that and keep, like you're saying, we have a certain budget for now. I think that if there's some emergency meeting that needs to be had and why it needs to occur, I think then that we can always discuss that. But I'm just trying to, for myself, again, is put everything in place that we need to put in place to have a healthy, functional, fully functional. This is not a criticism. I'm just saying we all agreed last time that we don't have enough things in place to make sure there's standards and protocols and and everything else that people talked about on both sides. We need to do that. So I just would agree that let's just try to take care of that first. If this is some emergency where we tapped out, then we can address it at that time. But that's my sentiment on it as well.
Well, I think, thank you both for sharing that. I think we have a unique circumstance here. Maybe not so unique, but we have a circumstance here that we need to make sure we're able to follow through on. And so, you know, if we're thinking of delaying this, Jose has already indicated that, you know, he can do that, but it'll be cutting it close. All right, so perhaps part of the measure can be to provide a certain level of funding that'll get us to next month. We want to make sure that we don't run out of funds to be able to pay our investigator now, like during this time where essentially this is the moment in time that PARA was created for, right? This type of investigative moment, and we need to make sure that we're in the process, that we're investigating, that we're fulfilling our responsibility as an organization. So my recommendation would be, and of course it's a recommendation, is to provide some level of additional funding just to make sure it gets us to the next board meeting. At that point, we can address some of these other issues that have been presented. All right, so with that said, is there a motion to provide, Jose, what do you think would be a reasonable amount to get to the next meeting?
I mean, I just had an idea come to mind, and I would remind folks, again, this is simply authorizing me to ask the Board of Contract and Supply to do this. And honestly, that's a process that takes it took prior to coronavirus, like 4 to 6 weeks to do. Okay. And so if we're gonna do this, I think it's the most efficient thing to do it once. I would submit that we do the same thing we did last year, $50,000, with the understanding that A, I need to ask the Board of Contract and Supply to do it, and B, I would document, of course, every dime. And there's at least we'll know that we can do it, right? There's a chance that we're not going to get access to that for a good couple of weeks, but at least we get that process started, right? Because if we wait another month and then we actually do it, and then we're going to do it another month, we're going to be at Easter time and still having the same conversation.
Thank you, Jose. So we'll stick to the initial request. Is there a motion on the floor?
I motion to extend the investigative services and allow Jose to go to the Board of Contract and Supply to request this funding.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Discussion or further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 board or 8 board members.
Okay, just want to be clear on the I votes. Myself, Elise, anyone else?
Kim.
Okay, Ms. D. Okay, opposed? 1.
So you can't see my hand, but I oppose until we get
Okay.
I get the emergency nature of what you're
Yeah.
talking about, but I think we could get to the 3,000 first and check.
All
So
right.
I oppose it on that basis.
Thank you, Mike.
I oppose as well on that basis.
Okay,
I oppose.
3, there's 3.
I oppose.
You opposed? Okay, motion does not pass. All right, let's move on to the next agenda item. Sean, if you could put the agenda back up on the screen. Okay, so presentation by Susan DeRita relative to proposed amendments to the para bylaws continued from the last board meeting. Susan?
Yes, I'd actually like to continue this, recommending that I work with Elise, because if what she's working on is also going to be an amendment to bylaws, I think we should come up with one unified document.
Yep.
So I'd like to continue that, and then I'll work with her and we'll present something together.
Okay. So we will table that, this agenda item to the next board meeting.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so this brings this meeting to a conclusion. Actually, we need a vote to close out. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
At least you need to say something. I had a question really quickly, or just a statement. So anyone who has recommendations for the changes in the bylaws, please give them to Susan before October 30th, and me would be the procedural and governance feedback as well by October 30th.
All right, motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed, abstain. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We will see you in a month's time.